that time and again I'm getting the queries regarding the note making technique. Okay, see, it's possible sometimes to make the notes, and it is sometimes possible to do the mental note making technique. Okay, I mean, like, because see, in case if you see this passage, the paragraphs are pretty small. Okay, so I mean, like, each paragraph just comprises of one or two or at the max three lines. Okay, so in such cases of this, the note making techniques may work or may not work. Okay, because you can always refer to them since the passage was very pretty less in the number, not very dense, okay, in terms of the facts or the ideas. But anyhow, let's go about it. Okay, so Antarctic glaciers have been melting at an accelerating pace over the past 4 decades, thanks to an influx of warm ocean water. Okay, so we know that the author maybe the topic under consideration is about the melting of the ancient glaciers, oh sorry, Antarctic glaciers. Okay, so melting at an accelerating pace over the past 4 decades, thanks to an influx of warm ocean water. Okay, a startling new finding that researchers say could mean sea levels are poised to rise more quickly than predicted in the coming decades. Okay, so this is actually the topic under contention, that is about the melting of the Antarctic glaciers, and why it is melting, because of the sea levels are rising. Okay, then the predicted one. Okay, now the Antarctic. So in case if you would ask me about the note making technique here, then the what I can write is, let's say it's about the melting of the ancient, and I don't know why I'm calling it ancient time and again. Okay, so it could be melting of the Antarctic glaciers because of the, I would say, a rise in the sea levels. Okay, or because of the warm ocean water. Okay, so maybe this could be the notes that I can make it here. Okay, so in case again, if you want some maybe something, it's about the Antarctic glaciers melting, and that is because of warm ocean water. Okay, warm ocean water and sea levels are rising. Okay, so maybe this could be the notes for here. Okay, the Antarctic lost 40 billion tons. Where is the cursor? I keep on messing it up. Okay, so the Antarctic lost 14 billion tons of melting ice to the ocean each year from 1979 to 1989. That figure rose to 252 billion tons lost per year beginning in 2009, according to a study published in the Proceedings of the National Academy of Science. That means that the region is losing 6 times as much as ice as it was 4 decades ago, an unprecedented pace in the era of modern measurements. Okay, so again, he said something that the Antarctic glaciers have been melting, and to support that thing, he's now quoting us some figures and the data. So again, I would just note making technique. I would just write that losing 6 times much ice as it was 4 decades. Okay, so something like that. Okay, I don't want to be alarmist, said Eric Rignot. Okay, so now be careful. Okay, this is not the author's opinion. Okay, so till now what we were reading what the author views. Okay, now this is some Eric Rignot, who is an Earth system scientist of the University of California. He is saying that I don't want to be alarmist. Okay, but he said that the weakness that researchers have detected in East Antarctica, home to the largest ice sheet on the planet, deserve deeper study. Okay, so there is somebody who is an Eric Rignot is the name of the scientist. So what he's saying is that the weakness that the researchers have detected in the East Antarctica, which is the home to the largest ice sheet, it deserves a deeper study. Okay, so the places undergoing changes in Antarctica are not limited to just a couple places. Rignot said they seem to be more extensive than we thought. That to me seems to be the reason for concern. Okay, the findings are the latest signs that the world could face catastrophic consequences if the climate change continues unabated. In addition to more frequent droughts, heat waves, severe storms, and other extreme weather that could come with a continually warming Earth, scientists already have predicted that the seas could rise nearly 3 feet globally by 2100 if the world does not sharply decrease its carbon output. But in recent years, there has been growing concerns that Antarctic could push that even higher. Okay, so the findings are the latest science. So I mean, like, it's about the Rignot said that there has to be a deserve a deeper study. Okay, and then he's telling us that the findings are the latest signs that the world could face more catastrophic consequences. Okay, so maybe droughts, heat waves, severe storms, and other extreme weather. Okay, so the part that I've highlighted, okay, so most probably in case if I have to make the notes, I would write them in a short form. Okay, but these are the things that are important from these paragraphs. Okay, so that kind of sea level rise would result in the inundation is actually flooding, okay, of island communities around the globe, devastating wildlife habitats and threatening drinking water supplies. Global sea rise levels have already risen even to the 8 inches since 1900. Okay, so the ice of Antarctica contains 57.2 meters or 187.66 feet of potential sea level rise. This massive body of ice flows out into an ocean through a complex array of partially submerged glaciers and thick floating expanse of ice called ice shelves. The outward ice flow is normal and natural and is typically offset by some 2 million trillion tons of snowfall atop Antarctica each year, a process that on its own would leave Earth's level relatively unchanged. Okay. So the Earth's level, the outward ice flow, and this is normal and natural, okay, and it is typically offset by, let's say, the snowfall top, okay. However, if the ice flow speeds up, the ice sheet loses can outpace snowfall volume. When that happens, seas rises. Okay, so the outward flow is normal and natural. Okay, but in case if the ice flow speeds up, okay, in case if it speeds up, okay, then there is a cases of the seas to rise. Okay, that's what the new research says is happening. Okay, so scientists came to that conclusion after systematically computing gains and losses across 65 sectors of Antarctica where large glacier or glaciers flowing into an ice shelf reach the sea. West Antarctica is the continent's major ice loser. Okay, the research affirms that finding detailing how a single glacier, Pine Island, has lost more than a trillion tons of ice since 1979. Thwaites Glacier, the biggest and potentially most vulnerable in the region, has lost 634 billion. Okay, and the entire West Antarctica ice sheet is capable of driving a sea level rise of 5.28 meters or 14.32 feet and is now losing 159 billion tons every year. Okay, so maybe in case if I just have to summarize this passage, okay, so we know that the author is talking about, he's showing the concern about the melting of the Antarctic glaciers, okay, and why he's worried because it is happening more quickly than predicted. Okay, and that means that the region is losing 6 times as ice as it was 4 decades ago, and it is happening more quickly than predicted. Okay, then he's telling us some research which is being done by the Eric Rignot. Okay, and he says that the consequences are more. Okay, in addition to the frequent out heat waves, severe storms, and other extreme weather that could come with a continually warming Earth. Okay, that it will not going to increase in case if the world does not sharply decrease its carbon output. Okay, so it will going to devastate wildlife habits, threatening the water supplies. Okay, so that is the case. So say this some amount of the ice flow is normal. Okay, but in case if it will gonna, let's say, surpass, okay, then the seas could rise. Okay, and the West Antarctica out of the all is the continent's major ice loser. Okay, so that is all about it. Let's get into the questions. So the passage was comparatively and easy to read. One read and you'll be able to understand it. No doubt that there were a lot many facts given to it, but again, the note making technique for such a fact oriented passage, okay, so it is slightly things that I have highlighted that you could write it in a short form as a note making technique, but nothing much because the paragraphs are pretty less, just a one liner or a two liner. Okay, but the main ideas of the paragraphs are highlighted in the green part. Okay, so what is the most pivotal research finding the author discusses in the passage? Okay, so what is the most pivotal research finding? Okay, that is the most important research finding the author discusses in this passage. So the author is discussing the research finding. Okay, so new research, and here also, okay, the findings. Okay, so the author was talking about the research finding, and out of which what is the most important? Okay, now the climate change has long impacted Antarctica and continues to do so even today. Okay, so was it the most important research finding? I mean, like, we need to look for the option which is a kind of going on with the main idea. So the climate change has long impacted Antarctica and continues to do so even today. At one go, this seems to be the probable answer. But anyhow, let's negate the other options and then come back again to the option number one. Okay. Climate change could have catastrophic effects that would destroy wildlife, deplete water supplies, and inundate islands. Okay. Now, this particular fact was mentioned. Okay. So findings are the latest signs that the world could face catastrophic consequences if the climate change continues unabated. In addition to the more frequent droughts, heat waves, severe storm, and other extreme weather. Okay. And see, that kind of sea level rise would result in the inundation of island communities, devastating wildlife habitats, and threatening water supplies. Okay, so this was actually the research finding. Okay, because the findings, but is it the most pivotal? I mean, like, is this the main point of discussion? This is, I would say, it is just an outcome based on one of the findings. Okay, so it is an outcome based on one of the finding, but is it the most pivotal? It is the most important research finding the author discusses in the passage. Is it related to the main idea? The main idea is related to the Antarctica melting. Okay, now this seems to be a general that the climate change could have catastrophic effects. Okay, so again, a climate change, and this is talking about that kind of sea level rise. Okay, so that's a case that I would negate this option because it is just reflecting, it is an outcome based on the finding of studies. Okay, it is not a research finding, but it is actually a kind of an outcome. Okay, and the climate change seems to be a very general case here. Okay, so he's saying that some of the cases normal and natural, and that also lead to an increase. Okay, in the ice formation, but the climate change to blame everything, and that too, this is not the main idea, this is just a part. Okay, the main idea is related to the melting of the Antarctica. Okay, so that is the case that this is not taken into consideration now. Global sea levels that have already risen 7 to 8 inches since 1900, seas could rise nearly 3 feet globally by 2100 if the world does not reduce carbon output. Okay, so now this line was present here directly. Okay, in addition, scientists already have predicted that the seas could rise nearly 3 feet globally by 2100 if the world does not decrease its carbon output. Okay, now this is also the data that actually supports the research finding. Okay, but again, this is just one part of the passage, this is not the main idea. Okay, so that's not the main most pivotal. I would not say that this is the most important research finding. It's one of the thing that is being highlighted, but not the idea or the theme around which the entire passage is actually revolving. Okay, now if the outward ice flow in the Antarctic region continues to outpace the snowfall volume, global sea levels are set to rise faster than the predicted. Okay, now this is actually the most pivotal research finding. Okay, so the ice of Antarctica contains 57.2 meters of potential sea level rise. This massive body of ice flows out into a complex area of partially submerged glaciers and thick floating expanses of ice called ice shelf. The outward ice flow is normal and natural, and it's typically offset by some 2 trillion tons of snowfall atop Antarctica each year, a process that on its own would leave Earth's sea level relatively unchanged. However, if the ice flow speeds up, okay, the ice sheets loses can outspace more snowfall volume. When that happens, sea rise. Okay, that's what the new research says is happening. Okay, scientists came to that conclusion after systematically computing gains and losses. Okay, or glacier falls into an ice sea level. Okay, so that's what the new research is saying is happening. Okay, so that is actually the most pivotal research finding the author discusses in the passage. Okay, now the problem with the first is, let's say, see, in case if you're gonna again see, okay, the passage that starts, okay, the passage starts with Antarctic glaciers have been melting at an accelerating pace over the past few decades to an influx of warm ocean water, a startling new finding that the researchers say could mean sea levels are poised to rise more quickly than predicted in coming decades. Okay, so now see, the opening sentence of the paragraph is also contributing towards the option number 4. Okay, that the Antarctic glaciers have been melting at an accelerating pace over the past 4 decades, thanks to an influx of warm ocean water, a startling new findings that researchers say. Okay, and what is the new research? That's what the new research says is happening. This is what is actually happening. Okay, starting new that could mean sea levels are poised to rise more quickly than predicted in coming decades. Okay, rest all the other things were either the one part of the passage, or the data that support research finding, or the outcome based on the finding, but that was not the most pivotal research finding. Okay, the research finding was related to the new finding that researchers, and we know this is what the new researchers say, so this is the most pivotal research finding. Okay, now coming back to the option number 1, that the climate change has long impacted Antarctica and continues to do so even today. Is little problematic. Okay, it is too general. Okay, it is too general. Okay, we don't know that whether it will continue to do so even today. Okay, so what we know is what will happen in the 2100 or the 1900, but this is all prediction. We cannot have an uncertainty for sure. Okay, and again, the climate change and all these things. Okay, so the better option, because it is actually talking about the most pivotal research finding, which we feel that the author says is the new findings, and the new findings is related to the option number 4. So that seems to be the better answer. Okay, so I hope you're able to understand that why option 4 is the best or the better option here. Okay, because that is what the author is talking about in the introduction and later on when he was actually concluding it. Okay, so I hope this is clear. Okay, so let's get into it. So see, again, this is actually explaining you the ice shells. Okay, so that's the case. All of the following agree with the facts outlined in the passage except. Okay, so we have to look for the question which is actually an except question. Okay, so modern measurements have helped establish that Antarctica is currently losing at least 6 times as much ice as it was 4 decades ago. So now there was a line directly I highlighted rows. Okay, yeah, there's a line that means that the region is losing 6 times ice, as much as it was 4 decades ago. Okay, and unprecedented pace in the era of modern measurements. Okay, so this is directly mentioned. Since this is directly mentioned, this is an exact question. See, now again, in case if I go back to the question number 1. Okay, see, climate change has long impacted Antarctica. Okay, this is too general as an option. Okay, the most pivotal research finding that the author discusses is related to the melting of ice. Okay, it is relating to the melting of the ice in the Antarctic region. Okay, so this is very general. In case if like you would say so, by while I was reading it again, so again it brings me back. Okay, so the author is concerned about the melting of the ice. Okay, not about the how the climate change has impacted Antarctica as a whole. Okay, and that group, so today it's a general. That's the reason that this was actually negated. Okay, so one of the reason again to support to deny the option number 1. Okay, so I hope this is clear, because there's a direct line. I've highlighted the line for you. The outward flow or melting of Antarctica ice shelf is a natural and normal phenomenon, and as long as it does not exceed the snowfall volume. Okay, now this was line we just highlighted right now. So the outward ice flow is normal and natural, and is typically offset by some 2 trillion tons of snowfall atop Antarctica each year, a process that on its own would leave Earth sea level relatively unchanged. However, if the ice flow speeds up, okay, then when that happens, the sea rise. So this is actually being supported by the passage. So not an answer. The warming of the Antarctic and the consequent rise in sea levels seen since 1900 are directly attributable to the human activities. Did you see anywhere that the author mentions the human activities? Okay, see, the author says, okay, the findings are the latest signs that the world would face catastrophic consequences. Okay, and continually warming Earth, scientists already have predicted that seas could rise nearly if the world does not sharply decrease its carbon output. Okay, so there was a one line, okay, that in case if the world does not sharply, and by world it actually stands for the people, okay, people globally, okay, if the world does not sharply decrease its carbon output, okay. See, the author does not attribute the rise in sea level to human activities directly, okay. It is said that the emission or the carbon output are responsible for the phenomenon, okay. Though he says that in case if the world does not sharply decrease its carbon output, sea levels can further increase, okay, but he does not attribute the phenomenon itself to the human activities. This could be the inference part, okay, that you can infer that in case if we do not decrease the carbon output, okay. But again, is it like the implication is that it may be, see, one way to take it is that if the world does not decrease its carbon output, okay, then there will be, let's say, the sea levels can further rise, okay. So but the author does not attribute the phenomenon itself to the human activities. The implication is that it may be accelerated by the human activities, okay. See, there is a difference between directly attributable, okay, I mean, like, directly this is the human beings that are responsible, okay. So nowhere he said it, okay. He said that it can be increased, okay, further it can be accelerated further in case if there is no decrease in the carbon output, but directly attributable to the human activities is a contentious issue here, okay. And that is the reason, okay, that this is not directly agree with the facts which is outlined in the passage. And moreover, in case if we see the rest of the other options, the rest of the other options are directly presented in the passage, okay. And so that is the case, okay. So nowhere the author says, okay, we, rather than saying that it is directly attributable, that the human beings are directly contributing to the warming of Antarctica, we can say that their activities are actually increasing, or their activities are actually increasing the rising in the sea level, okay. But directly attributable part is actually missing in the entire passage, okay. As per the current estimates, the Thwaites glacier in West Antarctica has lost the most amount of the ice so far. Now this can be taken up, it is implied, okay. So the research affirms that finding detailing how a single glacier, Pine Island, has lost more than 1 trillion of tons of ice since 1907. Thwaites Glacier, the biggest and potentially most vulnerable in the region, okay. So potentially most vulnerable in the region, okay. So that means that this is the this we can imply that the Thwaites Glacier in West Antarctica has lost the most amount of ice so far, since this is the potentially most vulnerable region, okay. So this could be taken up, okay. So implies that the loss is highest there. So this is correct, okay. So the correct answer to this question is option number 3rd, okay. I hope it is making sense to you. So the passage seems easy, but then the options are tricky, okay. Now, based on the passage, what function do these sentences serve? I do not want to be an alarmist. Okay, there was line here. Okay, said Eric Rignon, but he said the weakness that researchers have detected in Eastern Antarctica, home to the largest ice sheet on the planet, deserve deeper study. Okay, so based on the passage, what function do these sentences serve? So this is a kind of a logical structure question where you have to tell you that what is the importance of para 3 to the entire discussion. Okay, so I don't want to be an alarmist. Okay, but he said the weaknesses that researchers have detected, home to the largest ice sheet on the planet, deserve deeper study. So the places undergoing changes in Antarctica are not just limited to just a couple places. They seem to have been more extensive than we thought. That to me seems to be the reason for concern. Okay, so that is the case. Okay, now weaken the central premise of the discussion. No, it is not weaken. Okay, Eric Rignaud, this particular paragraph adds credibility, okay, or it reinforces the idea which is presented in the passage, okay. See, since the quote is followed by the credential of the scientist, okay, see, who was this, okay, so he was the scientist of the university and NASA who led the work, okay. Since the quote is followed by the credential of the scientist of Eric Rignaud, okay, and he seems to be in the favor of the discussion, okay, so he's just talking about, okay, that we need to do a deeper study, that the places undergoing changes in Antarctica are not limited, okay, rather there needs to be more extensive than we thought, okay. So he's actually favoring the discussion, okay, he's actually giving you, okay, like how you can actually expand the scope of your discussion, okay. So he's not weakening it, rather he's actually adding credential to the discussion, okay. So that's the case that the option 1 is incorrect. Validate the central premise by way of an example. Now the example is problematic here, okay? It's not an example, okay? It's research is finding that there are regions in Antarctica undergoing changes in structure that might have led to new finding that sea levels are prone to rise. So that is a case. Okay, it's not by way of an example. This is not used as an example. That is actually used to, I would say, to strengthen the author's point. Okay, or as a supporting claim, I would say. Okay, not as an example. Okay, add credibility to the discussion. That is what I'm telling you since the beginning. Okay, so that's the case. And add narrative value to the central topic. Now the narrative is more kind of a storytelling. Okay, so author does not use it as a mere narrative element. Okay, but it attempts to impart authenticity and credibility to the author's narrative by quoting the Eric Rignot. Okay, so whatever the author is narrating, to add credibility to that discussion, he talks about the Eric Rignot, and then he talked about his credentials, okay, that how important this particular person is in this field, okay. So that is the case, okay. So add narrative value to the central topic is not the case, okay. So, but it attempts to I would say the main idea of the author to put this quote is to impart authenticity and credibility to his own measurement or to his own ideas, okay. So that is the reason that the questions option third is correct answer, because it is not going against what the author is saying, okay, rather it is actually somewhat strengthening what the author is saying, okay. So add credibility to the discussion. Now all of the following would undermine the findings of the study except, okay. So undermine is actually weaken, and now this is an application based question, so good RC overall, I would say, in terms of the questions, I would say, okay, easy to read, but the questions and the options, they were good, okay. So all of the following would undermine the findings of the study except, okay. Now the carbon dioxide emissions increased exponentially from 1800 to 1900s, and since the 1950 they have become constant or actually declined, okay. See what we are saying, that the seas could rise nearly 3 feet globally by the 2100 if the world does not decrease its carbon output, okay. And now what it is saying, that the carbon dioxide emissions increase exponentially from 1800 to 1900, no problem, okay. And since the 1950s they have become constant or actually decline. When they have become constant or actually decline, then why we need to worry about it, okay. So it shows that the carbon dioxide emissions have declined and still Antarctica continues to lose, okay. So this undermines the study which calls for a sharp reduction in the carbon output or the sharp reduction in the CO2 emission to address the issue, okay. So that is the case, okay. So this is actually weakening, okay. So the author in one way, it is actually saying that you need to decrease the carbon output, but this is saying that it has actually become constant or actually declined. So this is actually weakening, but we have to look for the option which is actually an except, okay. Even if the outward ice flow is normal and natural over the next few years and the snowfall is consistent, internal weaknesses will continue to deeper in the Antarctic region, having far-reaching consequences. Now this is actually the correct answer, okay. See, the outward ice flow is normal and natural and is typically offset by some 2 trillion tons of snowfall attached Antarctica each year, a process that on its own would leave Earth's sea level relatively unchanged. However, if the ice flow speeds up, the ice sheet loses can outpace snow volume. When that happens, sea rises, okay. And what is this saying? That even if the outward ice flow is normal and natural and the snowfall is contented, still there are other issues, okay. Still there are some other weaknesses which will continue to deepen the Antarctic region, having far-reaching consequences, okay. So it does not argue, it does not undermine, okay, rather I would say that it is actually reinforcing the argument presented by the author, okay. So see, it does not undermine the argument presented by the author, instead reinforces the discussion outlined by the author, talks about that in, let's say, in some talks about, let's say, that internal weakness will have consequences on the Antarctic region, okay. So this is actually somewhat supporting the findings of this study, okay, that the Antarctic, there will be still, in case if this is fine, then there will be some other issues, okay, which will going to impact the Antarctic region, and that is what the passage was talking about. Okay, now the research on the Antarctic region has always been debatable due to the lack of systematic access to the vast area of glacier and ice shelves. Okay, now this is actually undermining. Okay, why this is undermining? Because if there wasn't a systematic, this is saying that lack of systematic access to the vast area of glaciers. Okay, so in case if there is, let's say, there wasn't a systematic access to the glacier, okay, it is not possible for the research findings to be credible. Okay, so what this option is hinting, they are saying that whatever the research findings you have, okay, they are actually incorrect. Okay, why they are incorrect? Because you do not have a access to the vast area of glaciers and ice shelves. Okay, so this is actually undermining. Okay, this is saying that the research finding is incorrect. Okay, uh, see, that's what the new research scientists came to the conclusion, that after systematically computing gains and losses across 65 sectors of Antarctica, okay, so they have this, okay, so but what they're saying, that it is a lack of systematic access. Okay, so they itself says that the findings of the study is debatable. Okay, why it is debatable? Because there is no systematic access, but this was saying that after systematically computing gains, so it is directly hinting towards it, and it is actually weakening it. Okay, now even if the sea levels rise by 2100 as predicted, the extent of damage to wildlife habitat and the potential threat to the water supply are often exaggerated, and the speculative projections made by the researchers. Okay, so it is actually flaunting to findings evidently by stating that researchers make a speculative and the exaggerated production. Okay, so but we can see that the research here was they were serious about it. Okay, now they are saying that this is not correct. Okay, so whatever they are saying, that there will be a potential threat to the water supply or damage to the wildlife and habitat, it is just exaggerated and speculative product projections. Okay, so this is actually kind of again weakening whatever the author has presented in the passage. Okay, but we have to look for the option accept. Okay, so the option number second, which is also going with the same line, that in still case if everything is fine, but still there are some issues that will lead to the melting of the Antarctic glaciers. Okay, and that is what the concern of the entire passage is, which is adding the credence to the author's main idea. Okay, so by this we are over with the passage on